Some folks will like you and some that just won't. Some that stay real and some that just don't. Trying to fit in will only take you so far. You'll never find home trying to change who you are.
Welcome to Vet with a Mic, content driven by veterans issues. So today we're going to talk to Joey, who is of the Average Joe podcast, and he is a flyboy. That's right. He sat in Goose's seat in the Top Gun type movies, right? So Joey, man, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
The pleasure is all mine, I assure you. Of course, I say that all the time, so I'm just trying to be polite. I'm kidding.
Well, I appreciate it.
I'm kidding. I got to give the officer types a little bit of a hell right out the gate, so that they know that us enlisted, we got some backbone now after the uniform, right?
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Goose is the easiest way to explain it, but yeah. So.
Yeah. So tell us that, we have been doing things a little differently. We just want to get right into the Average Joe podcast, but I do want for you to tell everybody what exactly is the distinction. I know that you kind of described it as being a passenger in a missile, essentially, but so what did you do then in the second seat of the aircraft?
Yeah. So I was what's called a weapons systems officer, or they call it WISO is the term, how you pronounce it. And so in the F15E, it's a two-seat multi-role air-to-air air-to-ground fighter. And so I'm in the back seat. And really the role kind of stems from, even like back in the day, obviously, F14 is the most famous example of being the Top Gun plane, and now the F18 in the new version. But even like in, F4s and stuff like that in Vietnam, that's kind of where the WISOs and like that heritage kind of really grew from. And primarily in the F15 now, the weapons system officer, or WISO, over the past 20 years has been primarily the talker in close air support roles. It's like talking with the JTAC,
Right,
coordinating all the weapons and sensors, really like setting up the attacks, and kind of owns all that stuff. And then even now in the air-to-air realm, it just helps having that second person, because again, we have a few extra sensors and neat things on the airplane. And it's just a lot for one person to handle.
Hell, I can't even multitask doing this. Look, I forgot to put on our music. See?
Yeah.
Can you imagine if I had to be the one like trying to do all of that at once?
Yeah.
No way.
So we got 7 screens between the two of us, so it's quite a lot going on.
Yeah. So, is the F-35? Do they have, or is it a one seat or two, or is everybody pretty much 2 seats now?
They're switching all the 5th gen, so F-35, F-22. They're all single seat, but the F-15EX, for those that keep up in the acquisition world, the Air Force is buying new F-15Es called the EX to replace the single seat, supposedly, but they have 2 seats.
Does it stand for extreme?
I wish. It's way less cool official name.
Yeah. So that's fun. So let's talk a little bit about the Average Joe podcast, man, because we first connected through Instagram because I was like, hey, he's doing stuff. I see he's doing stuff very similar to here with the Vet with a Mic, but just I guess within the podcast, it looked as if you were staying more within the transitional space, which we kind of we're scattershot. We're all over when it comes to Vet with a Mic. So what got you started on Average Joe?
Yeah, so I got out in March 2020, and kind of right as COVID was hitting, ended up in a pretty successful job I'm still working out today that I really enjoy. And so after a few months, I was like, well, this doesn't always work out this way for people, And so I started to look at like all the lessons I had learned. My transition out was, I would say, not average in terms of just, deploying right before I got out, coming back. I had some personal stuff. My son had to have a surgery and all this kind of stuff that just took away from what should be like a normal transition timeline. And I still use air quotes because there's no real one transition timeline. Yeah. But I had just a few short months to get out and make that successful transition, or really start the successful transition is a better way to say that. But so after a few months of kind of reflection, I was like, well, how can I put those lessons to use? And that's kind of where the idea started. I didn't really have a huge plan. I came up with a name, bought the domain name, put out social media, said I was starting a blog, and I hadn't even written my first post. And so I just kind of forced myself that way into doing it.
Yeah. It's funny. Vet with a Mic's a real clever name, right?
Yeah.
So I literally had just bought a mic and was like, all right, well, I don't know, I'm a vet with a mic. Maybe that's so at least yours is way more clever than mine.
Yeah.
At least there's a pun of some sort. Mine's
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
A description rather. That's all mine was. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was two reasons for that. The first reason was that I didn't want it to be about I didn't want it to be, like fighter pilot themed or Air Force themed, because I wanted it to be for all veterans. And so that's why, you don't, I post the cool guy shots and stuff occasionally on Instagram, but I mean, there's a lot of pages out there that do that, right? Like, that's not really the point of it.
It's funny. I felt the same way. Like, for the longest, I didn't even say that my name was Ryan, right? Like, I just was almost anonymous. I didn't want it to be about me or the things that I had done or the things that I had done after the uniform. I just kind of wanted it to be as generic as possible so that whatever we were talking about, you could just see that, you could see that in your own life. And I thought that anything that I talked about that was related to me detracted from that. Well, obviously, no, there's a little bit of, you can't remain anonymous on the internet for very long, because people start questioning like your credibility or who you are. They want to know more about you. So then I got some really, I guess you'd say some real positive receptions from people just saying, thank you for talking about yourself candidly, like in the things you struggled with or the things you went through. That really put it to perspective for me, and it made me feel as if I'm not alone in these things. So I will tell you, Joey, man, is eventually you may end up having to acquiesce and talk a little bit more about your cool fighter jet days.
Yeah, I know, and I do. I enjoy it. I was on a podcast a while back where guys, another Air Force flyer, and we avoided it a little bit, but you can only get 2 aircrew guys together. And
well, it's kind of like we just interviewed Chris last week, and he was a scout sniper, and he kind of felt the same way. He didn't want to be solely defined as that, but those type of positions, whether it be a scout sniper or a pilot, you guys have a lot of prestige within the community, and so people are naturally going to gravitate to that. They want to know more about it because it's really interesting. It's really cool, man. We grow up watching things like G.I. Joe, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, they're going to want to know about the little details, the behind the scenes stuff that only you would know about. Yeah.
And I definitely enjoy it still. So I don't want people to get the wrong impression, but that's kind of why I wanted it to be about everyone in the military, and then kind of a play on my name, right? Simple, right? Another average Joe, and regardless of what you did when you're in, everyone feels like they've done this cool stuff, and they have, and then you get out, and sometimes you're like, oh, I just now feel like another average Joe, and so it's kind of, I've had a couple people call me out and be like, oh, well, you're not an average person, and I'm like, well, that's kind of the point, right? Is that it's, you feel that way, but you're you can kind of look at it whichever way you want, right?
And everything's relative.
Exactly.
Right? Everything is. Because no matter what your experiences are, you're still going to think that they weren't that exceptional, right? I have talked to, whether it was Adrian, who was, Force Recon Marine, or, a couple buddies who were like door kickers in Iraq. They still they will frame their service in relation to what they did. As, oh, I just did this, or I just did that. It's all routine and humdrum. So it's natural for somebody who's a fighter pilot to do that, or somebody who's an admin. We all, it's all relative to us, right? But I do understand trying to take great pains to say, hey, look, this was just my job, and I enjoyed what I had to do, but this is only one single element of me, and that doesn't completely define who I am.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the type of content that Average Joe, the podcast, does. I mean,
sorry. So the brand is called Another Average Joe, and then the podcast is called Another Average Podcast. So I kind of kept them a little separate.
All right. So that was my.
No worries.
So Average Joe, the brand.
Yep.
Is
about just transitioning and
got it.
going to that next phase after the military, which again, I talked about, I'm going through a little bit of like redefining some of that, which we can talk about whenever.
Yeah.
And then, the podcast is more motivational, self-improvement type. I try to keep it, I definitely use my lessons from the military because that's
Right.
what I know. But it's not, specifically for veterans. It's more in the self-improvement space.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. There's so let me ask you though, because you're in that what we've called here a time or two. You've just exited out like the first 2 years of the mourning phase, right? Which essentially is this for those of us who are not regular listeners to the Vet with a Mic show. There's just this period of time in which you go from being a service member into the civilian space now, and you kind of have to figure out who you are now in absence of the uniform. And so there's times in which you may feel, well, a little salty about things. You're like you look back at your time in the uniform, and you may shrink away from military related culture. Right. I remember my first at least year out of the military. If somebody was one of the types that was like really into motivator, I'm like, ugh, I don't want to be around. I don't even want to talk to that guy. I don't want to have those conversations. What'd you do while you were in? Yeah, this is what I didn't want to have those conversations because I think it was just part of that natural grieving process. You gotta figure out who you are now outside of the uniform. So I say all that to say this, man. You coming from such a high status position within the uniform, how did you adjust to feeling that loss of status, that loss of social camaraderie and being mission first? How did that land on you?
Yeah, so I like the way you kind of phrased that because I hadn't heard about that being called the mourning period until
I'll give it to Jenna. The millennial veteran and I first probably talked about that, and I think that's actually she phrased it that way first. So
okay, nice
tips, credit to Jenna from the millennial veteran. Yeah.
But it's pretty interesting that you say that because I actually kind of see myself now at this point, being a little bit more reminiscent and trying to keep up now. A lot of it has to do with because the way the stuff's going on, the current events of the world, my old unit's quite active again. And so some of that stuff I just try to keep up with just because I have buddies and stuff that are still there.
Sure.
But that was one of the things that when I was getting out, I was very bitter and burned out. And I remember just being like, I just need to find a job. Like, I don't really care the purpose. And that was the wrong way to approach it. And so that's one of the things I enjoy about the job that I do now is, it's still in the defense space, defense acquisition that I talked about. But I find a lot of purpose in that because I'm still helping, like I'm not flying the fighters on the front lines anymore, right? But I'm helping develop the technology and stuff like that. And to me, that still gives me that purpose that I had when I was in. So I think that's kind of how I solved that.
Yeah, you're still in the military orbit. Yeah,
exactly.
You're still adjacent, if nothing else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I just needed really what I did was a lifestyle change, right? Because I enjoy what I did. I enjoy what I'm doing now, but what I was doing before wasn't going to support, my goals of like having a family and having kids and all that kind of stuff. And I know people do it, more power to you, but that's not what I was looking to do. And so,
the uniform lifestyle is alien.
Yeah,
it is not. I mean, it is. It is almost antithetical to everything that we grow up thinking of what you should do as an adult, right? You move around a lot, right? So you don't ever have a lot of times to put down roots. There's plenty of times in which you're just gone for a year or so. So from like spouses and kids, it's just so alien compared to the rest of the American culture. And I could see that would definitely be a driving force as to why you were like, man, I need to do something new. But I guess it's not because of the type of work you did. There was no temptation to just go into a civilian related field, right? Like, because I was an MP, right? So there was a civilian equivalent to that, right? I could have worked in civilian law enforcement, and I started that process to do it. But my heart wasn't really in that either. So I can imagine that puts you in a really unique space, is because it's not like there's a civilian equivalent for Delta.
No, and that's the thing. The technical side of it is like, my my hours actually didn't count towards any type of FAA rating unless I got them on my own, or got my own.
Is that because of the platform?
No,
Like,
it's a DoD wide. No, it's a DoD wide thing. Unfortunately, like, you're not considered any type of like pilot in command or first officer type status that they would see in the airline. So
is that so they try to keep you? Is that what it is? Is that a retention tool? It's like, you can't get out because you can't do that anywhere here. Yeah.
Well, so my opinion is no. I just think it's just antiquated rules because, I mean, the WISO bonus is less than the pilot bonus. That's just facts. So if they were going to keep us, the bonuses would be the same, but that's a whole other subject. But, that is a big concern, is pilots leaving for the airlines and all the hiring stuff like that. And so, a lot of people are like, oh, why don't you go that route? And I definitely could have, right? I mean, even having to go back, and do the hours or whatever. There's schools and academies and stuff like that. But it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. And I love flying. Don't get me wrong. I still enjoy flying. But flying as a job just wasn't necessarily, I wanted to be something that I do like for fun now and not just as my primary job. So,
So do you guys have stick time? I assume then, because I want to say that you mentioned that the first time you flew an aircraft was in the uniform. So how do they decide who's going to sit in which seat? Is it just something that you're both in flight school and they're like, oh, okay, well, you're one, you're two, you're one, you're two, or is there some leveling mechanism that they use to delineate between the pilots?
Yeah, so it's different. I would say, I don't know if you've had anyone at like Army Aviation. It's very different from the way they do it. So you kind of start out from you start out from your commissioning source, whether you're ROTC Academy or OTS, the Officer Training School. You'll kind of know which school you're going to go to prior to. So there's pilot training, which is done at a handful of bases, and then there's only one base for the Air Force, and they call it CISO, Combat Systems Officer, and it encompasses a couple different specialties. WISO is one of them, but then they also like navigators and electronic warfare officers. So you'll know that prior to, and you'll go to a separate school. So like I went to an entire different training pipeline, and then the first time that I was with like F15 pilot students was in F15 training. So that entire process is like 2.5 years to get mission qualified in a fighter jet, which I don't think a lot of people understand that either. But like I commissioned in 2013, and it wasn't until like late 2015, early 2016 that I was the new guy in the fighter squadron.
Imagine that they put you through the ringer to be sitting behind like multi-million to $billion aircraft. Who would have thought? Yeah. It's funny. It's like in my discipline too. People are like, man, you sure do a lot of school. It's like, it's like they want you to be competent or something, man. It's crazy. Exactly. It's crazy. Yeah. All right. So that's enough uniform talk. I just had to ask that because it was like holding in a sneeze. It's like, man, how do they make up? Who decides what? Because it sounds like you're both equally qualified to do either position. So it seemed almost to us outside of the aviation world that it seemed like flip of a coin almost. So that racky sacking gets done like from your commissioning source based on GPA, previous flight time, all that kind of stuff that goes into it. So there is there is a metric. It's not just random. It's you compete for it at the early. So given now this is going to be interesting, right? Given the fact that there's so much information integration you have to be doing in the second seat. So what's actually more competitive, first seat or second seat? It depends, right? Because that comparison I think it's unfair. Probably, I get it. Yeah, well, because when you get in your pipeline, I competed against people that
that had the chance to go be the backseater, right? And they wanted to do it, and we were competing, right, to get our choice of aircraft. Because I could have been in like a AC-130, B-52, stuff like that. So that's kind of the competition. It's not like the front seater and the back seater.
Right, because you know, this is gonna probably ruffle some feathers, but it almost seemed like there for a second you were like, yeah, they're just the stick jockey, and I'm back here in the brain just making things happen.
Well, I mean, that's, you know,
the
way it works.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, now I'm gonna get a letter. Thanks, I appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit more. I gotta
represent the Wizzo Union.
Yeah, no, I get it. I do. I get it. So let's talk a little bit more about this 2-year period and what has really driven you in life after the uniform. Now, I understand you said, now I have a job that I feel pretty connected to, but obviously there's something still that you're needing to fill if you've started a podcast and a brand that meets some need about you. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What's the driving force behind Average Joe? Why? I know you said something about you know that your experience may be a bit atypical, but I mean, have you had contact with other veterans that has largely informed that is atypical compared to the rest of us out there?
No, I mean, it's not backed by any type of.
Okay, you're just okay. I get it. So that was something that you intuitively deducted. I got it. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, yeah, we kind of talked about how, you know, within, what is it? I was going to get out in 6 months. I found out I was deploying, so I deployed for 3 months. I came back. My son had a surgery. All that kind of stuff, you know, I would like to think is not typical of somebody who's a year to 6 months from getting out. Like, hopefully they're not doing that kind of stuff, because they should be focusing on other things. Yeah.
Oh, see, I interpreted that completely different. I thought that you were saying that yours was atypical because you easily transitioned into a career after the uniform.
No, I'm talking about the lead up to it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Right. So I can relate to that a little bit. Like, I was trying to transition out from Italy.
Yeah. I can't imagine the overseas guys or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a little hard to make a plan from thousands of miles away for what your next move is. Yeah. Okay. So then yet again, what was the driving force then? There's got to be, like, for me, I'll quit bearing the lead here, right? So for me, I noticed that I was answering a lot of questions from my brothers and sisters from the uniform about mental health related issues, right? Whether it be just a misunderstanding of the roles within their mental health treatment. Like, there's a social worker, and there's a psychiatrist, and there's a psychologist, and what each one of them do within the care process. Or, of course, I would also get a lot of calls from buddies, you know, do I have bipolar? Because my wife says that I have bipolar, right? Just some more lighthearted questions too. But I noticed that there was kind of a common theme of just not understanding a lot of the psychological and mental health content out there. And the only way for a person to utilize resources is if they have some framework of understanding to them. Because the unknown is really threatening and scary. But as soon as you have a little bit of information, just even a little bit, it feels less scary. It feels less threatening and intimidating. And so I thought, well, what's a good way for me to be able to do that is to the masses, instead of having like 1,000 different phone calls, can I have one conversation that reaches 1,000 people? That's where Vet with a Mic kind of naturally developed. So what's your origin story for the Average Joe brand?
Yeah, I mean, I like the way you kind of phrase that. I kind of saw this as, okay, you know, I made the transition out during, you know, didn't know it was COVID at the time. Obviously, that was just starting. And so after a few months, I was like, well, what did I learn? You know, I look back and I realized, like I said, you know, and my time was a little, my time I was going to leave the military was a little bit uncertain because I was trying to do what they
Sure.
call Palace Chase. So if you're not familiar with that, it's a term. Basically, you trade your active duty commitment for some commitment with the Guard. And so I was waiting on that to get approved, and that would determine my actual like ETS separation date. And so that's why I knew I was getting out. I knew the latest date I would get out, right, at the end of my current commitment, but I didn't know like when Palace Chase was getting approved, how much time was going to get taken off my active duty and transferred to the Guard commitment. And so, like I said, that unknown, not knowing, I was kind of like waiting when I really probably shouldn't have been waiting as long as I did. And then the same day I found out, like I mentioned earlier, the same day I found out that I was approved for Palace Chase at a certain date, I also found out I was deploying for 3 months. And so then hey, the deployment became the number one thing. Everything got put on hold. I was like, cool, I'll figure this out when I get back. And I did, but it's like, what other things, I had a lot of opportunities, such as the DoD Skill Bridge, which I encourage people to look that up. We can talk through it now if you want, but there's kind of opportunities that I feel like exist that people just didn't know about. And I was lucky because there was a kind of a network of mentors. There's a pretty active Facebook group from the Strike Eagle community. And then I joined a couple of veteran nonprofits that were pretty helpful. And so, doing that was kind of the key, I think, to my success, just starting to have those conversations, because like you said, the unknown is what's scary. Then you start talking to people, and, I found a great example. I found a nonprofit that does free interview prep for veterans and military spouses, and, all this kind of stuff that I didn't know about at all, 3 months prior to, and here I was just doing it all at once. Yeah. And so to me, the whole purpose with Another Average Joe is to, both sides of it, right? Because the transition is it's not the day you get your DD-214. It's not the day you leave. There's a period before, and like you said, we've talked about the period after. So I kind of want to focus a little bit on both. And really the before part is more of, hey, like, let's just bring awareness, right? Because everyone's situation is going to be different, right? It's going to depend on what job you do, what your commander is like, and that kind of stuff as to how much time you can take, which is unfortunate, but that's reality. And, just going through the mandated TAP course and whatnot is not really enough. I don't think anyone agrees that's enough. I've never met any one person who said, I felt prepared after TAP. And,
so I have a unique thought about that, right?
Yeah.
It's just, closed ears, man, right? Like I try to, channel who I was at that moment, right? And I was so ready to get out. Like, I made the joke 1,000 times at this point. There was a me-sized hole in the wall, just like a Looney Tune character, of how quick I was ready to get out. And they could have been talking about the most insightful, useful things. And I was just, I'll figure it out when I get there. I'll figure it out when I get there. I'll figure it out. And of course, I had a loose plan of some sort, but plans are, especially coming out of the uniform, are often designed to fail. And mine did. But I don't know if we can really, they take a lot of slack, or a lot of the flack for not doing enough in TAPS, but we got to kind of own a little bit of that too. And maybe we were not as receptive to the message as we could have been at the time. I'm not putting that on you, putting that on me. That was definitely who I was. 2013 sailor Ryan over here. I was not receptive.
Yeah, and I agree. So someone told me this one time, and I don't even remember who it was. This has been almost 2 years ago now. But they were like, the purpose of the military is not to train people to get out of the military. And so their take was very much like, yeah, of course, TAP's not great. Like, that's not the purpose of the military. And I was like, you know what? That's kind of right. I mean, it is. You should help people transition out, and it's a whole thing. One thing I will say that I've heard that they're doing now with the new version, and I don't know, obviously a lot of it's probably become virtual and crap like that, but the last I heard, and so someone correct me out there if I'm wrong, but they've now changed it to where if you're getting out, you have to start this process a year before your separation date. And so when I was doing it, I mean, I could have done it up to like, I pushed it pretty close, the official like actual program. And like you said, I mean, my DD 214 isn't even signed by me because I wasn't around by the time they got.
Yeah.
Like, I saw the little draft that like, here's the edits. You know, make sure that your service dates and stuff is correct. And
They wouldn't let me off the watch bill to do all this stuff like that.
Well, yeah,
that was not going to happen. Which, I mean, it is what it is. You know, different jobs,
and,
different ranks.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying too. Is hopefully by this mandating, right? Because this is a DoD mandate now that they start this TAP training a year out. Hopefully, it's forcing. I mean, I'd like to hope. I don't know that it's forcing the conversation to happen earlier, and that's really what needs to happen. Is like, hey, if you're, you know, the unfortunate reality is, like you said, some people, you know, you've got that commanders out there, leadership out there that's not going to, you know, really allow those people to do what they need to do. It's going to be harder for them. Yeah. It is what it is. But if they can start to know those resources ahead of time, right? If they can at least start to request things. I'm not saying everyone could do DoD skill bridge. Like, you should be able to. And if your commander is trying to stop you, then, you know, you need to go a different route, because that's like a DoD program. You know, we're not going to go down that path. But
one thing that I would like to see TAPS, I guess, be more, it needs to be more intensive. I don't like the things in which I may have been more receptive to hearing about was not about how to do a resume. You know, those things, I mean, I get it, but when you're sitting there and you're just like, I just need to get this checked off so that I can sign my checkout sheet. That's all I need this for. There are, I guess you'd say, templates out there for you in life after the uniform with a Google search. But as you and I were kind of talking about, the loss of status, the loss of social support, the loss of feeling like a member of a community, no one talks about that in TAPS. No one says, oh, by the way, you're not ever going to feel like you can go home again, because the people you've known your entire life are going to feel near stranger to you. Those are the things that I'd like to see that are, let's just say, force multipliers or synergistic in nature when it comes to the transition process. Because I talked about this probably at least a dozen times on this show, but in the uniform, you live so forward focused. You're future fixated. And next mission, next leave, next duty station, that's all you ever think about. You can do anything for a year, right? You just keep focusing on the future. You live there. You talk about what you're going to do, the meals you're going to eat when you go on leave. All of those things are just daily conversations that you have. And that may be useful in the uniform. It's definitely a strategy, but it is not very useful outside of the uniform, because that present tense hits you like a ton of bricks. There's no more ECS. There's no more next leave period. It's just all of a sudden the future is now.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think really aggravates the transition process, because you don't get the opportunity to unpack that with somebody, that this is going to be a fundamental life-altering transition you're about to go through, just like basic was. So whoever said that it's not the military's job, I disagree. You have to prepare your workforce on both ends of the life cycle, right? It's not just about what they can do for you while they're in the uniform, because the society is still held responsible for what the next stage of their life is. So you have to help lift the load in that regard. But that's what I would like to see TAPS do a little bit more. I'm not saying necessarily everybody sit around and do a group session, kumbaya style or anything, but just to talk about, hey, have you guys considered, have you talked to people that you grew up with? Yeah. Do you feel like you have a lot in common with them anymore? No. Well, that's something you were going to consider moving into the next part of your life, because those things If you're feeling that way now, you're going to feel that way in 6 months when you get out. But not a mention, not a whisper of those type of, let's just say, psychological forces that may undermine your resources in life after the uniform.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree. That's why the conversation needs to start earlier in general, right? Because the job searching and all that kind of stuff, which again, like you said, there's all those resources out there, Google, and I believe there already exist enough resources, in terms of like groups that represent the veteran space. It's like one of the most overrepresented per capita kind of thing.
It's a cliche almost.
Yeah. And so that's why like I didn't want to make another nonprofit with another average Joe. I wanted to just be a brand, right? Where I'm trying to connect people to existing resources and stuff like that. Like I didn't want to become like another foundation or another thing that's doing like replicating effort. I wanted to try to bring awareness to different efforts. And like you said, with some of this kind of, now that I've had a couple years to think about it and kind of like, okay, at first I was going to just become this website where it's like all these links, right? I'm like, that's not really useful. I mean, it's just, it's like, I don't know, I'm an SEO one-stop shop for Google. So I kind of moved away from that. And again, I definitely want to help people out with resources and, advocate for things that I think are underutilized, like the DoD Skill Bridge program, and, encourage people to find nonprofits that I know that are helping, making a difference and like doing that kind of stuff. But more of it shifted to the mental health aspect of it. I don't know if that's the right way to frame it or not, but
how about development?
Development. But because I'm much more interested in this like self-improvement and like bettering yourself and using the military, using those experiences to kind of like propel yourself upward. Because I think, I've seen people that have done that with incredible success, and we've seen it, right? Like, Black Rifle Coffee, everyone jokes is the example, right? But I mean, look at how much money those guys have made, off of their brand.
They're almost folklore at this point.
And so that's the example that I point to because everyone knows it. But everyone can do that in some regard, right? From their service or because of their service, and they don't have to tie it back to it necessarily. You don't have to be like, oh well.
It's not like he was a coffee manufacturer in the uniform.
Exactly. So that's kind of where I see this going, is like encouraging those people that are getting out and becoming like, in some way they're trying to better themselves, better their family, whatever it is their motivation for, because like we talked about prior to this, is like, I'm trying to get away from all those negative connotations and stuff about veterans and the veteran community. It's like self-loathing, and man, like I got stuff to do. I got things I want to do with my life now. I did my active duty time, a couple deployments, whatever, but all that kind of stuff, I want to use it to better myself and like better my family and, economic upward mobility, all that kind of stuff we were mentioning earlier. So that's kind of where I see this going.
For sure. I have said this quite a few times at this point. Man, I feel like I repeat myself a lot in these conversations. But, I came from pretty humble roots, and the uniform definitely helped me achieve things in my life that I don't think I would have done without it. As much as the, let's just say, the turmoil that was my time in the uniform was, I would never take it away. It gave me opportunities that I don't think I would have ever had without it. And so, there's some damage that comes from, serving. There's definitely some risks. My joints can definitely attest, but I don't think that people really understand the amount, to your point, of resources that are available to you just because you serve. If the Black Rifle example is just one, that the only reason why they were successful is they maximized their veteran capital. That's what they did. They took something that was culturally relevant to us, the Black Rifle brand. They applied it to coffee and they do some creative marketing stuff, but they really used their group identity, their group membership of the veteran community, and created something that really cultivated a sense of brand loyalty to their own company, because they were saying, hey, this coffee's for us. This is our coffee. It's the Black Rifle coffee. And the veteran identity bought into it, like our whole community. Like, I have some Black Rifle socks somewhere. I'm just telling you. I think they were a Christmas present, right? That's the kind of just how loyal we are to each other. And we've talked about this a lot, is your greatest resource in life after the uniform are other veterans. And that's what Black Rifle figured out. Mm-hmm. They can pitch to other veterans, and they can do some really great things outside of the uniform by mobilizing those resources within the veteran community.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the list kind of, because there's lots of imitators that are popping up like after. I don't know if you've taken a gaggle around the interwebs as of recently, but there are all kinds of clever little puns for coffee companies as of late.
Yeah. I mean, there's, what is it? If you're going to get out, you're going to start a coffee company, a t-shirt company, or something else like that.
Maybe we'll add podcast to that.
Yeah,
list.
Exactly. I can't say anything, but yeah.
No. I mean, and we speak in jest, but I think it's important, however you find it, is to find some conduit, some channel to develop meaning and purpose in your life after the uniform. If that's talking to yourself in your living room like you and I do, that's all right too, right? Or if it's creating a brand through a t-shirt company, that's all right too. Just the hardest thing to do in any venture is start. And if those of you are out there listening and you're going, man, but I don't really know how to do this, or I don't know how to create a company. I don't know how to, take that first step. I think Joey just told you earlier, neither did he.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't either. I am figuring this stuff out on the fly, right? Totally, to use an aviation term, I am flying by the seat of my pants, right? This is all I'm doing here. I tweak stuff all the time, and your craft gets better with successive trials. You just keep trying. So we talk a lot about here of just putting yourself out there is the only way to grow and to develop something that maybe has been an episode of The Average Joe, another Average Joe podcast, because that is true. The only way to expand your horizons is to put yourself into some sense of discomfort, because to learn, you have to be a little off your mark, because it's something that you've never done before. So of course you're not just going to immediately be awesome at it. And that learning process, it can be humbling. I know it has been for me.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I could see that even like looking back, right, on the ways the kind of opportunities that I got, right? Because if I didn't ask, or if I didn't start putting myself out there, and this even applies like, going back, obviously being in the military, but, I'll use examples from my transition time where it's like, okay, I saw a resource that somebody listed in our Strike Eagle network, right? So I reached out, I joined that organization. I went to like one of the first in-person like meetings or whatever, and started to like meet all these different, they were connecting in Raleigh, North Carolina, not too far near, outside of where Seymour Johnson is, Goldsboro. They had a networking event. So it was like guys that are about to get out in, whatever, a year or so. And it was like CEOs and recruiters and stuff from businesses around Raleigh. And so I went to that. I didn't end up working at any of those places, but what that led me to was, once I joined that organization, I ended up connecting at the time they were doing everything in Slack before they moved over to their own platform now. And they were still small enough at the time. The CEO reached out and was like, hey, we have an opportunity for someone to do a skill bridge. Well, because I knew what that was, I immediately messaged him. I was like, hey, I'll do it, you know? And so like, I didn't even know that opportunity existed. And I would have never known had I not been like, oh, let me check this organization out. Let me join this and like see what I can do, you know? And that was really, I think, the key, because like I said, I was doing a skill bridge for a nonprofit whose job was to help transitioning military find jobs. And so I was also a transitioning military member who needed to find a job. And so like, that was really the catalyst of like learning about all these other resources, you know, growing my network. And, you know, because networking is, yeah, going to these events is good. But it, you know, there's more to it than this, like those networking events, I would say. And so like my chance to actually do all this stuff and practice all that, you know, led to learning about this interview company. I did all this interview prep. I worked with all these different jobs, and it really helped me when I got to the company I'm at now, when they interviewed me, right? Like it all led up to that, because I got connected to that company through a buddy of mine. But if I'd got connected earlier on, right? Like who's to say that they may or may not have hired me if I hadn't been as prepared as I was because of the steps I'd taken, right? It's this kind of conversation about opportunity and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, man, because I think kind of what you're describing there, at least for me, is opportunities to learn something are probably the most valuable opportunity you have in life. A conversation doesn't really cost you anything, but not having a conversation can cost you so much. And I just kind of channel back to some earlier times in my life. You know, I'm an introvert, man. This may not seem like it in this setting, but I really feel uncomfortable in going to like a networking meeting. That would be really uncomfortable for me to go and interact with a bunch of strangers and to kind of have to have all those forced conversations with somebody. And I remember at a certain point in my life, that would have been something that I would have never engaged in, right? I never would have. But now, after getting used to this idea of putting myself out there and putting myself into a state of discomfort, that's something that now, after I realized like, hey, wait a minute, I can do this. This is not impossible. It didn't kill me. It's not torture. It's just a little bit of discomfort for a little bit of time. And once you have that experience, as we kind of talked about before, it's not nearly as threatening the second time. That the blanks that you fill in to the unknown are always worse than what reality is, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I could see how those networking events may not be sufficient in their isolation, but man, they cultivate and teach a certain skill in applying, let's just say, experiences to future gains.
Yeah. Well, and your whole point, right? Like if you're not even taking that on in the first place, because you talked about being introverted, I consider myself to be introverted too, which is funny, right? Because I'm over here going out on all these podcasts and talking about it, but I kind of, I don't want to say got over it, but I got over it, right? From my job, right? Because you're not going to fly fighter jets and be responsible for like briefing and doing all this and like, you know, be this introverted person that can't handle it. It's just the way it is. And so that, I think, you know, when you talk about like skills that have helped me that don't necessarily, I don't need to always tie it back. I don't need to be like, oh, because I flew fighter jets, yada, yada. It's just now who I am as a person. Right. I've become this, you know, okay with putting myself in more uncomfortable situations, right? Because of what I did in the past kind of thing. And that I think has helped me more than anything else.
And what you're describing is self-efficacy, right? And so in the clinical literature, self-efficacy is just a belief in yourself that you can handle whatever's out there, the environmental demands that you have to navigate. But that's just like many things in life. That is something that is built across time through tiny interactions every day. It's like a muscle. You build it across time. It's not, you don't lift the weight one time and, look jacked and tan. You have to continue to put yourself into these positions to facilitate growth. And I think that's probably one of the things that I would drive home the most just about things in life is the only way to grow is to be uncomfortable and to continue to be uncomfortable. Just because what you find anxiety provoking starts to become more and more and more. That level it gets expanded. You take new territory. It's not, whereas the first thing, you and I may be highly introverted, that conversation may have been the threshold to make us feel uncomfortable before. Well, now after we've done 1,000 conversations with strangers, now it may be doing a conference, like just speaking in front of 100 people. But you can see that growth happens across those little bitty interactions, those baby steps that you take. And the only way to get better is to start, to kind of channel what we were just talking about a second ago. The hardest thing of any venture is to begin. So don't fret about beginning perfectly.
Yeah.
You'll get better. You'll get better. Yeah.
100%. And I'll say, and I've said this before, but you just kind of reminded me of it, was that the day I got out of the military, I've told this to somebody else before. I said I would have been more comfortable because I was already very comfortable at my job, right? I was proficient.
Shit hot. Yeah.
Yeah. I was very experienced. And my situation was interesting because there's always more upgrades you can do, but I'd kind of like turned some of those down because I knew I was getting out. And so like my, level in terms of being a lead wizzo and all that, like I was proficient and comfortable. And it was challenging to get to a point where it was like, okay, I can't be too comfortable, right? Because aviation is a super dangerous business that can kill you. I mean,
complacency kills.
Yeah, 100%. But I was more comfortable the day I left the military. If they had said, okay, you're going to go deploy a third time, than if I had, doing what I was about to go do, which was leave.
Yeah,
which is crazy to think about.
That's the known quantity.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm saying. We are so uncomfortable with, even if the thing in which we are familiar with is terrible, we are more comfortable with staying with the thing that is familiar, regardless of how much suffering and misery it brings us, than the unknown opportunity. We may have a much better life after, but just going through all those risk analysis of filling in the details, but it could also be a lot worse. And then we tend to just like go down that rabbit hole and create all these ways in which it would be much more terrible. That's why we should just stay in the place that we're at, because that's evolutionarily, that's sound, right? And we've talked about this before as well, is that was a mechanism within the brain, right? You attend to negative details because those are the things that can kill you.
Yeah.
The positive things aren't the things you worry about. The smell of roses aren't the things in which you find yourself, keeping you up at night. It's the things in which that cause harm and destruction and hurt in your life that you give energy to, because it's the thing in which you find life-threatening.
Yeah. No, I really like that kind of analogy, because I mean, it applies, like you said, to the military, but it applies to just life in general. I think people are much less prone to do the thing that it is that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so, if in some way that, obviously, if you joined the military, period, right, that was uncomfortable for everyone.
Oh yeah.
At some point, like we'll just say that, right, to leave it as open as possible, right, to everyone's experience. But so you've already have a leg up, or an opportunity to have experienced that. And so like realizing that, I mean, getting out or whatever is next for you is uncomfortable, but that's like good. And that's a big mindset shift too, is to be like, okay, I now look at things and I'm like, it's good that I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it means, it's not comfortable, but it means that like what's about to happen.
I'm growing.
Yeah.
I'm about to experience an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, in the stress literature, people who appraise setbacks like that, or just being in an uncomfortable position, if they view them as opportunities to show growth, their stress response is like practically negligible. I mean, they don't have the same cardiovascular risk or just all the things that are linked to deleterious kind of outcomes with stress, because they're appraising it differently. And I think that if we can get into the habit of that, we'll see our lives become much more, we'll feel a much more sense of well-being in our life, and that we can handle things that are out there that challenge us if we view them as opportunities to excel or opportunities for growth.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So most active on Instagram. Look me up at another_AVG_Joe, or just feel free to check out the website, which is anotheraveragejoe.com.
Yeah. So if you've enjoyed this conversation with Joe, I know I have, and you feel as if somebody out there would benefit from hearing this conversation, please do us a favor and spread the good word about the conversations that are happening here on Vet with a Mic. If there's a particular episode that you would like to see happen here on Vet with a Mic, please reach out to me across all the social media outlets, or you can just email me directly at ryan@vetwithamic.com. But as always, if there is some military content creators out there that you would like to listen to, we do have some buddies that we support here on this show. The Drive On podcast that Joey actually, I believe, is and also a guest that's going to be coming up soon, or is it already launched, right?
I did last year sometime. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's in Scott's extensive catalog, excuse me. Or you can check out the Brave and Faithful podcast, or the Morning Formation podcast, the Hard to Kill podcast, or the Oscar Mike Radio. We have tons of friends of the show. So if you like what we do here, you'll probably like what they do too. So check them out. But as always, however life finds you, hope life finds you well. Till next time.
Now that I'm without, I'll start looking within. Gave it all out, now it's time to take in. This time I'm learning how to live in my skin. Trying to be me, I ain't trying to fit in. Trying to be me, I ain't trying to fit in. Knew that I was right when I was wrong. Tried to move away without moving on. Learning every day where I belong. So don't spend your whole life trying to be what you ain't. You can't hide your heart with a new coat of paint. You think they'll accept you, I promise they can't. So just be who you are and forget